Hey everyone, thanks for joining today's webinar, Solving the OT ICS Cybersecurity Talent Puzzle, how to build the teams you need and fast. I'm Roger Hill. I'm the founder of Hillstrong Group Security, and I've spent about 30 years working with industrial control systems and operational technology. Everything from covering applications engineering and system architecture to secure software development and OT security. So today, I'm here with our co-host, Chuck Tommey, who's also from Hillstrong, and James Morris from NDK Cyber. And we're excited to have you here as we dive into one of the bigger challenges that we face within the industry, finding and keeping the right cybersecurity talent for our OT environments. So we're going to explore practical ways to bridge the IT/OT talent gap and how to accelerate team development and prepare for future cybersecurity trends. This is a fast changing landscape. Chuck, James, and I, we're all going to share our own unique perspectives and experiences and the lessons we've learned along our journey. And so with some actionable insights that maybe you can take away as nuggets to help you build the teams you need. So before we begin, let me introduce my co-hosts, Chuck Tommey and James Morris. Chuck?
Thank you, Roger. So yeah, good to be here with you all. Similar to Roger, a co-founder here at Hillstrong Group Security. Been in the OT space about 30 years and seen a lot, right? And it all comes down to, in my opinion, I think most of our opinions, the people, right? You got to have a great team that can get along well internally, but also with the customer. And so that's why we think this topic is so important. Go ahead, James.
Thank you. Yeah, well, yeah, good to be here, guys. Good to join, and hopefully to provide some value here from the other side, the more recruitment and staffing side of the fence. So, James Morris, I'm a director at a company called NDK Cyber, and we've been recruiting cybersecurity professionals for, crikey, 10, 11 years now. You can probably tell by the face and the lack of hair that I'm well into this now. And we've done that in the UK, where I'm from initially, and then we've transitioned around 5 years ago to more US, and this has taken us all around the world. And we've really seen, touching on today's topic, an increase in demand for people with cybersecurity skills, particularly within that ICS and OT space. That's a real sort of element of demand at the moment, whether it's OT security professionals in their own right, or it's a incident response or a penetration tester with OT skills would be really nice as well. So yeah, it's definitely something that I think we should be really looking at for the moment.
So listen, before we even get started, James, I've just got to ask real quick. Did I just hear you say the word crikey?
Crikey, did I?
Yeah.
Maybe.
That's awesome.
I'm trying to not be a British stereotype here, but
I just heard the crocodile hunter in my head. That was awesome. Well, listen, let's go ahead and get started then. Listen, gentlemen, let's go ahead and start off with discussing, this topic of bridging this IT/OT talent gap. As OT environments continue to merge with IT systems, what we call the convergence, especially with even more and more of a push towards cloud technologies. And a lot of this push is actually coming from the automation vendors themselves now. We're seeing a major talent gap that really understands both sides of the fence, if you will. And it's hard to find IT cybersecurity personnel and professionals that understand ICS and SCADA systems. And this can create challenges when it comes time to protecting these environments without accidentally disrupting operations. So what we need are people with a mix of cybersecurity skills and OT knowledge to keep production environments secure. This challenge is only getting harder as unfortunately, the cyber threat landscape is evolving. We're also facing an issue that I see every time we visit a plant, and that's this aging workforce, if you will. So many of the seasoned professionals with years of experience with these systems, well, they're starting to near retirement. And we don't have that younger generation really coming in and fulfilling these roles like we once did. And this knowledge isn't easy to replace. And it actually presents a big risk for business. Bridging this gap means finding new talent and capturing experienced individuals' expertise before it's lost. So today, we're going to talk about how to address this gap and do it quickly, because in this industry, we can't afford operational disruptions. So James, let's go ahead and start with you. What's your take on some of the growing talent gap, and how are we positioned to tackle it?
Yeah, I think there's a thousand moving parts here, and I think one of the good news stories, I guess, is that this isn't the first time that we've seen a talent gap or a skill shortage or a demand for a particular skill set in an area. I know people get hung up on different terms here, and some people will say there's not a talent gap, we're just not looking in the right places and things, but we've seen this sort of thing before. If we cast our minds back to 10, 11 years ago, back when I was recruiting application security professionals.
Mm-hmm.
This is more the enterprise side of the house, so I know it's not too OT specific for the minute, but I will circle back. We took a lot of people from more application development and programming spaces that they were doing security, but they didn't really realize they were. They were more sort of security champions within that team. They just weren't called an application security engineer. So there's other examples in the GRC space as well, taking people from more of a compliance or legal style background and bringing them into ISO 27001 or NIST. We have transferable and skills in that space as well. So I think a good news story is that we've seen it before. So we need to probably embrace how other spaces have done that and how we can bring people over. So whether that's us looking in the OT security space here and saying, look, I spoke to a guy last week. He's been with a water wastage plant for 15, 20 years or so, the typical story you were referring to there.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't realize too much, but he is their cybersecurity guy. He's just not called that. He was called an automation engineer, I believe, in his official title. But he was actually doing all the cybersecurity work, and he even had the GCISP certification. But he was saying, I'm not a cybersecurity guy. And I sort of bring him around and say, no, you are. You have these skills. This is what we're after in the industry. And it's kind of like a penny drop moment of, oh, really? Oh, okay. Well, because I read these job descriptions that are out there, and these companies are asking for the world and degrees and this and that and the third thing. And I had to sort of say, look, more often than not, maybe these companies aren't looking necessarily for all of these skills. It might just look that way from this big, long-winded job description here, but we need a mindset really and a bit of know-how, and then we can make the jump from there rather than everything in detail in that spec. There's all we can look at and raise awareness for. We don't necessarily need everything here. What do we need? And companies as well can also take that view and say, look, we know we need these hires. We need these 2 hires by next year. We need someone to look at a more policy approach, and we need someone to look at an overall architecture. What do we really need out of these roles here? And then really go for those skills, and then have everything else as more of a bonus or a plus, rather than sort of waiting for that ideal person, because that's where the sticking point can be a little bit and puts people off, and there's all sorts of things that can go awry there.
Yeah,
I've gabbled there. Sorry.
Yeah, no. Hey, Chuck, jump in.
Yeah. So, I totally agree. I think it's way more important to find folks that are interested in the field, right, and have a vested interest in making sure that those systems that we're talking about, the OT systems, are secure, right? Roger and I sometimes call that a true believer, right? Somebody that understands the threat, understands, that, hey, we're talking about protecting the systems that undergird the society, the civil society that we live in, right? And so we want to make sure that we're finding folks that have that piece, right? And maybe even on top of that, the soft skills piece, right? We can teach people a lot about cybersecurity. We can teach them a lot about OT systems, but sometimes it's hard to teach how to come into a situation where, IT and OT may not be getting along very well, or it's a high stress environment because they got to get something in place quickly. So having somebody that can handle that is just as important, if not more, than some of the experience and knowledge in the cyber and OT systems.
One thing that occurs to me when we're talking about this is just your changing perspective that comes with experience, right? So I think back to that just immediately following Stuxnet and building out the security services with Siemens initially. And, of course, at that time I was Mr. Automation, right? So, I don't think there was any verticals I had not done any work in. And the thought process that I had was I wanted to find the right type of kind of InfoSec, cybersecurity, deep domain expertise, because I could teach the automation side, right? There was no doubt in my mind. So I kind of went through the process, and it was almost like I'm going to date myself here, but like the movie The Dirty Dozen, right? Putting together that special team and really some great talented people. And then all of a sudden got to the point where, okay, now it's time to kind of teach the OT side, right? And then all of a sudden I realized that was much more challenging. How do you teach experience? Right. So, it started that journey, but ultimately where I've landed at now is this notion that the best approach, it's more about the cultural and personality types and the willingness and eagerness of individuals to learn. And by creating cross-functional teams with the right domain expertise and letting these cross-functional teams almost organically blend and create the type of specialty skills that we really need within the industry. But that's the one thing that I found that it's kind of worked for me anyway. Chuck, James, any thoughts on that? Or
Yeah, I'd agree. I think, and I'm only speaking here from people we've recruited for, or maybe people I've spoken to, and we've tried to pinch them from somewhere, and they've said, "Look, no, I'm having a good time, but here's what I've built." And yesterday, I spoke to somebody who was they were from an IT background initially, not the OT side, and they went into one of the big four consulting, got into OT, and now they're heading up OT for a pretty well-known pharmaceutical organization. And they were saying they're probably 60-40 in their team at the moment, taking from 60% OT professionals that have some sort of security spin and bringing them in. But they've also had really good joy of bringing in not even necessarily IT people, just people from outside. And that could be military or colleges and places like this, and joining links. And they've almost become a name in the community of OT as we hire and we train good OT security people, and they've attended conferences. So they've gone above, sort of put the name out there to advertise the fact that we do not necessarily need you to be called an OT security engineer now. We can work with what you've got. And like you say, it's the keen interest, that what are we trying to protect? Okay, cool. Let's just make that happen and learn this, coupled with experienced security people in the team, that makes it work for them, at least. I understand that's not going to be the case in every situation, but it worked for them.
Yeah,
go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah. So I think that's we hit on just a piece of the training part, right? And I think that's so key. No matter where you get and how up to date folks are on both the OT side and the cyber side, that's changing so fast these days that having some kind of internal training program, or at least a budget, so that folks can go to conferences and learn more about what's going on in the space from both an OT and a cyber, is going to be critical for long-term success.
Oh, 100%. 100%. And, that's actually an interesting point, Chuck. One of the things that I've personally found to be the most beneficial in my career journey anyway, is when I think back to a lot of the conferences that I've attended, it's not even the session so much as the networking and the individuals you meet along your journey, and that personal network that you develop. If there's one thing that I could really encourage, especially the younger generation, establish those relationships, those business relationships, and nurture them along your path, and it'll return tenfold.
Yeah, the ICS SAC,
Absolutely.
information sharing and analysis associations or whatever they call them these days. But those relationships and sitting around the table after the conference or whatever and telling war stories, that's as valuable as official training most of the time, because this is real stuff that's happened, right? And is happening. So that's cool.
There's James, I'm kind of curious if some of these buzzwords are over on your side of the pond, such as strategic workforce planning, when we're talking about future cybersecurity needs. I think specifically when we think about manufacturing becoming more and more digitized, I think the need for OT cybersecurity talent is only going to grow. Companies need to think strategically. It's not just about organically, if you will. It's very similar to when you're looking at a tech startup and you're looking at how do you scale. You have three choices: you either do it organically, inorganically, or through partnerships. It's very much the same with I think businesses that are looking at the whole the workforce planning topic. It's not just about bringing new people on board. It's about keeping the talent that you do have as well. So upskilling is key here. There's a lot of talent on the plant floor or in IT. Again, I think it's that cultural fit, if you will, finding the right type of characters that are just driven through learning and self-improvement as well. So I think continuous improving and continuous learning, all of this comes into play. I think there's some interesting programs out there in terms of working with colleges and technical programs. James, I think you mentioned something about working with different veterans groups and onboarding them. So I think it's about being creative and micro experimentation, if you will. But James, I'm kind of curious over on your side of the pond, like I said, is workforce planning really a focused topic?
It is, yeah, it is. It's cool at a multitude of different things in different locations, I think. But yeah, absolutely, and it's the retention is so big here, and we have so many conversations daily, with me and my team here, and a big sort of reason for, look, I'm not super actively looking for a new role, but maybe I consider something. And that's usually because the buy-in to the security operation has slowed down. And it's not even necessarily that we're making layoffs, but it could be something like there's no budget to do even the things you talked about there, the events and the even more local and regional events, or just time to have that research. That's huge. And that, I think you'll find if there's any sort of managers or hiring managers listening to this, if you've not maybe got budget to sort of increase base salaries or bonuses and things like that, is there a way you can look at allowing your team to attend? I don't know if we can plug exact names here, but there's a pretty big conference down in my Florida every year, and there's a few others dotted around the country. I think October
name drop. That's okay.
S4 or ICS are the larger ones, and there's others that sort of contend in that world as well, or the more regional events. And like you say, it doesn't have to be these guys and girls coming out with an exact grid or GCISP. It could be that value they found in networking and finding out how a different organization does something a bit different. That's a learn in itself, and it just keeps those people interested and entertained and shows you have a buy into cyber. The worst thing you can do is just silo it off. It becomes a function that just says no to everything. No one respects it, no buy-in, and then it's like, what are we doing every day here? We're just sort of monitoring a few systems and hoping we're okay. So yeah, to answer your question, that the extra sort of retention of people is huge, and that's a key way in my eyes you can do it.
So I'm kind of curious, are you finding employers coming to you with kind of a long-term plan saying, hey, we know we're going to need 2 folks this year, another person with this kind of more specialized skills next year? Do they have it planned out, or is that something you would encourage them to work on, kind of having that strategic plan?
Some do and some don't. So I spoke to a chap earlier today, and he's got 3 hires lined up for next year to support his team he's got 7 now in his program already. So that's a pretty big organization, and he's got sort of the the green light to go ahead and do that, and that's sort of Jan next year. But then others will be in the sort of conversation of, well, it depends, and that depends on how our sales do this year, this end of this quarter, as to what headcount I'm going to get. I've only just got buy-in to the OT security program, so I'm sort of making do with what I can for the moment, and I've got other priorities other than staffing, oddly enough. So it will depend, but it definitely exists. It does.
Yeah,
One of the things that I'm just kind of curious from a recruitment perspective, one of the things that we focus on is helping manufacturers build out security programs, right? And of course, that typically starts with defining that strategic multi-year roadmap and kind of boiling that down into 3, 4, 5 different key initiatives over that multi-year period. The point being, there's a distinct difference between the skilled positions that you need for the operation of a program versus the ramping up and deploying and implementing. So there's a period of maybe a 12 months, 18 months where you're deploying a lot of different controls and a lot of different implementation and tuning work, where at the end of that, the operation side is slightly different. So I'm curious from a recruiting perspective, if you see contract, time-based jobs really kind of taking off within OT security, or how is that handled and what are you seeing, James?
Good question. I'll be transparent, Roger. We've got, I think, I wouldn't say the contract stuff is too heavy on an individual C2C type basis at the moment. That could well change, but what we do see is your consulting firms or your system integrators picking up a lot of OT, and I've seen a few sort of core players in the space develop OT security practices over the last year or two, which may well sort of be leaning into that. But yeah, to answer, I haven't seen a whole lot of the whole sort of C2C contracting thing come up at all.
How about, so Chuck, have you had any experience with kind of the fractional work with some of the different executive positions? That's something that, the whole gig economy has really been a focus last few years. And I'm just wondering if that is leveling off a little bit or.
Well, from my experience, I get, as I'm sure you do all the time too, right? Get tons of interest from recruiters and even whether they're corporate recruiters or folks like James that do it, full time for clients. And I'm seeing, all kinds of different things that they're looking for, whether it is somebody to come build a program as a CISO or, be a director of a team to individual contributors. So I think, from what I'm seeing, there's still a demand across all parts. From Hillstrong's perspective, obviously we try to help with that upfront, development and deployment piece. And so, the longer term, somebody to actually build or on what we've done and maintain over time is what we're typically, helping our customers and clients look for, right? But in my opinion, right now, it's still we need folks at every level and of every stripe, right? Of every type. So I don't know, James. Do you when folks are coming to you, are they really specific in what they want, or are they more, hey, we just, we need somebody? How do you see that?
I think it tends to be more specific. And so just to sort of frame it up, we've done work at sort of OT security engineering level for more asset owners in manufacturing, funnily enough, right through to the more consulting and services side of the house on the other side of the fence and all in between. But it does tend to be quite specific, and it needs to be these skills in these areas and this experience, so whatever that might be.
So what kind of advice would you give somebody that's maybe interested in entering the OT cybersecurity workforce to make themselves, more attractive to a company?
There's a few ways to do it. So I think looking for a new job is kind of like a job in itself, and it's a bit more like a sales job. I'm sorry to say it, but it kind of is in a way. It's that networking piece and it's the approaching piece and things. But I think it depends where you're coming from. So I think a really good example of this is if people are coming out of military environments or services or policing and things like this, where they have been in OT-centric places, there's a lot of terminology that tends to get sort of, the translation isn't always there. It might be the same thing, but the terminology is vastly different. So I would try and get with the community, maybe people that have made the transition or got into the OT security space already, and just have the resume in front of them and say, look, guys, girls, is this the sort of thing that you use in sort of the corporate world or your world? Am I lined up here, or am I using a load of sort of very military style terminologies here, or policing, or whatever it might be, So I think making sure you've got that right, and then not underselling yourself. And if going back to the chap that worked at the water wastage plant there, who didn't believe he was a security professional, really, you've got a GX certification in it. So that's for me, that's like a milestone of I am cyber. So don't undersell that. And if you have got that security experience, then bring that out on the resume, and don't be shy about that at all. And maybe just making little tweaks like that can really help. And then you can look at obviously the job boards have a huge play in here. LinkedIn's got a huge job searching function now. Indeed, Glassdoor, Monster, they're all out there, and there's a lot of overlap. It does pay to get yourself out there, but then the organic networking piece as well. There's 1,000 ways to sort of do this, but it's being really proactive with it, I'd say, and identifying what skills you've got that are transferable.
Mm-hmm. So I have a follow-up question, but before we do that, I see we have a question from the audience. So Cedric is asking, is there an urgency that we're seeing in hiring IT, OT, ICS cybersecurity professionals based upon regulatory requirements or internal need? So James, do you want to take this from kind of a recruiter perspective, and then I'll kind of tag along?
Yeah, of course. Regulations, I think, definitely playing a part. There's geopolitical things going on in the world at the moment that is also playing a part, and I think it's probably a perfect storm with the two, to be honest. So you've got like NIS2 and things like that are coming through, and obviously you've got the more regulated environments with your NERC SIP that will always be there and always have a need for it. But also, the geopolitical and the landscape at the moment. The spotlight is China inner systems already. It could go wrong at any day now. So we're sort of, that's maybe stirred up a bit of a need, for sure.
Yeah, I would say I would definitely echo what you said about NIS2. What I experienced the last few years actually is there was definitely a scramble of finding expertise around NIS2 directives, especially over in the EU. That was definitely a focus area. One of the things that I anticipate in the future, though, is the CRA, the Cyber Resilience Act. I know there's two major milestones, 18 months and then 36 months. So we've got a little bit of time, but I think that one has a lot of the automation vendors scrambling a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I think that's going to be really interesting. Because I think from a kind of a product security perspective, there was almost a declining interest in some of the vulnerability management patch, focus, because I think some of the automation vendors weren't really seeing the demand, if you will. Mm-hmm. And now CRA's going to reverse that really. So I think that'll be really interesting. But, I think there's also some of the different regulatory environments, like for example, over in China. So I think regulatory environments, Cedric, from my perspective, yes, that's always a big driver. But outside of the regulatory environments, and Cedric, I'm not sure if you're US based or Europe. One of the things that I think outside of the regulatory environment is just the landscape and the media, right? So just, for example, within the manufacturing sector, it's hard to ignore just the last 12 months of ransomware attacks. And, these are board level discussions. So anytime there's a board level discussions, anytime there's a 60 minutes episode with a PLC and the CEO is asking, do we have this? It flows downhill, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, and there's almost a quasi regulatory thing going on out there, right? The insurance industry is really getting
Mm.
involved and starting to require companies to either follow certain regulations or standards at a minimum, or at least show that they have somebody on staff or somebody on retainer that's helping them get better, right, in their overall cybersecurity. So I think that's another forcing function that's out there, and it's probably because of all this ransomware that's in the news, and the insurance companies are having to pay off on that, right? So that they're getting concerned. But so let me flip this around. The question I asked earlier about, how does an individual make themselves look like a good hire? Flip it around and talk to us about how you coach companies to make sure that they're putting their best foot forward, and that they've got good job recs out there that will attract good candidates.
Yeah, sure. So I think again with this, it doesn't have to be too sort of OT and ICS specific here. It just falls back on strong, I guess, recruitment processes and standards and what you put out there. So I would say first and foremost, get yourself aligned with internal stakeholders, your peers, HR, the person that holds the purse strings, whether that's you or somebody else, of what we're actually looking for and what we're willing to pay for them. And as long as everyone's aligned there, then you're good to go. The worst thing you can do is say, like, I need an OT security architect, and I'm going to pay them 120K, and they've got to be in the office. And then we go to market, and then we can't do it. And then we finally find someone, and then so-and-so over here says, no, they're not right because they haven't got this degree. So get all that settled from the off, I'd say. And then when you're going out, I think similar to how we described, I think I used that military person example earlier of sort of demilitarizing the resume. You can do the same with job descriptions and just like remove the fluff, I'd say. Make sure it's sort of to the point enough. And I'm in a sales role, so I understand that. Oh, the lights have just gone off here. Fantastic. The joys of live webinaring. What on earth is going on? Where was I? I work in sales. Professional. So you've almost got to write these job adverts that somebody, they're at the gym in the morning, they're on the treadmill, they're on their phone. That's where a lot of people read these job descriptions now and these adverts and things. So make it appetizing enough that it's in relatively plain English whilst getting the points across of what you actually need in the role. And then going back to what we actually need. So do we need someone that knows NERCSIP inside out, that can also do a whole load of configuration level OT security tool engineering, plus experience in automotive and pharma and manufacturing, plus experience in this and a cert? Probably not. We probably don't need that person. So the way that you put those job descriptions and those job adverts in very, very human terms of, this is the company, and feel free to sell yourself. That's cool. That's fine. That's what people want to see. That's what they get excited about. Sell yourself. This is the role in a nutshell, a sentence or two. And then you can go into sort of what we require out of this one, followed by, it would also be really nice, by the way, if you had a certification like GRID, for example. And I think that's the approach we need to have. And then again, when we use the example of that person who's looking for a job in the OT security space, finding these people is also a job of the company. So whether you have an internal talent team that does that, HR, you employ an agency to do it, however you do it, you need to really put good effort behind that, because it's your logo and your name on everything. And you need to be really on top of, okay, we've got a really tight interview process here. We know exactly what we're after. We're interviewing the right people. We're not waiting around here. We're sort of getting feedback straight away, being really honest and open, and just really good recruitment practices like that will see you find good people. I think there are your sort of starting blocks to getting going, really.
I think I was reading something recently. I think there's different, and this question is about technology and the role of technology in recruiting and finding talent, right? And what I was reading about was some of the different technology filters that are going through. And I think some of the HR departments are using this, where it just filters and it's looking for different keyword and phrase searches, and it was an article talking about good candidates being left behind, being filtered out, and getting some of that inside baseball, if you will, of how to get past some of these filters. And then the follow-up to that is I saw a really ridiculous video showing a guy doing an interview where he had Gen AI listening, and he was literally just reading for what Gen AI was saying. And how in this world, I think that's both sides of it, from the employer and the potential employee. How do you deal with this crazy technology wave now?
You know what? The short answer is I don't know. I'll be transparent. We don't use any sort of AI filtering systems like this. Be honest, I don't really trust them. Maybe it's like an old school way that I was taught to do it, before we had all this, and it was just review your resume, and if we are the right ballpark, then we go. If we're not, we don't. But yeah, I know what you mean. I haven't really seen them be super effective. I could be very wrong here. So if you have seen this and you're listening to this now and it's very effective, then please don't fire a load of hate at me. But I don't trust it. I really don't. I think there's no substitute for a human being reviewing that resume and saying, okay, they could be right because they got this. I don't get it, to be honest. And I think if you are feeling like you're being shut out because of those technology auto reviewer things, then there's ways you can do it around using the networking piece, going back to the people focused approach and saying, okay, look, Roger, I've applied for a job at Hillstrong. No one's got back to me just yet. I'm going to ping you a quick connection via LinkedIn. I think you get 100 connections a week via LinkedIn to use them. And if you're looking for a role in your space, people are always happy to help. If you connect with somebody and just say, look, I'm looking for a new role. I know you're not hiring right now, but I saw you have experience in this world. I wonder if you could help me. 6, 7, 8 of those people out of 10 are going to say yes. The others might get lost in the
network. Yeah, leverage it. Yeah,
awesome. Exactly. LinkedIn's a really powerful tool for that. Definitely use it.
So I want to make sure that we don't have a false lead here, and I'd like to pick Roger's brain for a minute here, since you've built teams several times over the last 10 years. Pretty much from scratch or from next to nothing. Walk us through kind of how you approach that problem of I need to get a high performing team up and running fast. How do you do that? What are the different pieces you plug in?
So that's an interesting question, Chuck. And I think I would choose to answer that in a couple of different ways. Number one is how I originally approached it versus maybe the lessons learned, and how I would, how I've kind of evolved that approach. So I think early on, like I stated earlier, it was thinking very technical, the technical skills and disciplines and domains of expertise that I was seeking, and that was really the sole focus. And listen, being an engineer. I tend to be technical anyway, right? So that was my sole focus. And, that proved to be challenging, right? And what I mean by that is you can have just a brilliant technician. It doesn't mean they're a good human being. I've learned this, and I learned maybe the hard way how just exhausting it is to manage the wrong type of individual. So this is where, I tend to think of the axis, right? Highly skilled, right? Versus the cultural fit. And honestly, you give me somebody of the right type of cultural fit and personality and eagerness, I'll teach them the skills, because what you'll have is somebody that is just helps to create that helps that dynamic that you're really trying to create with that vision.
So James, this sounds like something that you were talking about earlier, right? That these auto reviewers may not be able to filter for that, and that's something that somebody like yourself can help really help the company that's looking for talent distill what they're about and present that to the client, right? And so talk us through that. How do you help somebody like Roger find the right person.
Exactly, that's exactly it. And to the initial example you used there, if you've got a resume there that's not got the keywords the supercomputer machine is looking for, but it says, transitioning into a new life, a new career, looking for a career in OT security, that thing might not pick it up. But how do you help Roger with that? So I think it goes back to that, getting the foundation right, so making sure we're all on the same page. So Roger might say that I need these top skills. These are my 3 top skills or experience points. If you can find them, great. All right, okay, cool. And there's a secondary and there's a tertiary. Tertiary, is that the word? Not sure. As a third option, here is what I could also play with as well. So if we look at the, going back to that application security example, if we can get an application security engineer who is 10 years in experience and they've got experience with cross-site scripting and SQL injection and all these things, and they've worked in a bank, yada, 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 fantastic. But then I might say, look, Roger, if we can't get those experience, will we look at someone who's maybe done some security in their spare time? They're a bit of a hobbyist, maybe. They're looking to sort of get into this space and they're a core developer. And if Roger's open to that, then we can start bringing those people in as well, as long as they've genuinely got the right attitude. So in this world, it might be a case of, look, we've got somebody. I'm going to use the military example again because it's a really common one these days. But I work I might not call that environment an OT, but I know that Roger's open to people coming out of that environment, and if they've done some sort of recon work or they've been in security in some way and they've got the right sort of attitude for it, they're attending conferences, they're going through some trainings at the moment in the OT security field, they might not be on the resume, but I'll know that they are from speaking to them. And also I can just pick up the phone to Roger and just say, look, I've got a guy or a girl here. It's a bit left field from the ideal fit, but I think they've got a really good personality. They come across fantastic. They've got the soft skills. I think you can train them. Are we going to pay them top buck? Probably not, but they'll have the benefit of the career trajectory increasing very, very quickly. So yeah, it's, to your point, Chuck, it's going back to the setting expectations of what we're all happy.
Yeah.
And so Roger, so Roger, now you've got, a couple good candidates. What are the other ways? I know you've talked before about there's other ways to pull people in than just the recruiting.
Yeah. So there's, I think just being in this space for such a long time, Chuck, you tend to, well, I know quite a bit of folks, been around a while on the conference circuit and talks and so forth. So my experience in the last decade, I would say, is anytime I'm posting something that there's a community where, the funnel builds up rather quickly, right? So there's a 2-stage issue here. One is finding that pool of candidates that you can select from. And a lot of this, honestly, is depending on what is the state of the economy at the time. Does it favor the employee or the employer, right?
Yeah.
But what I would say that the biggest challenge that I think I faced is really on the latter end, which is the interview stage and candidate selection stage, right? And I'm going to go back to the technology side for just a moment, Chuck and James, and that is one of the techniques that I have found to be very beneficial. And this is where I really kind of embraced HR as a partner when I first started learning about behavioral based or situational based interview techniques, right? Rather than just the pure technical skills. One thing that occurs to me, though, is when you're doing these situational based interview techniques, is this world has changed so drastically. How do you know when you're doing that interview that that's the candidate answering? And then I'll tell you one last thing that is my own personal gripe is I made a bad hire a couple of years ago, and this person had another full-time job. And I don't know if this is a coming out of COVID situation, but I've talked to other individuals and they've had that experience as well, where this not working in the office, people working from home, and people that are having 2 different jobs, and it's you really have to flush out and a lot of you have to do your due diligence in that interview process.
Really cool. So it looks like we've got another audience question. Um, what are your views concerning using an online generative AI-led OTICS cybersecurity training solution that provides OTICS sector-specific cybersecurity defense training to diverse cybersecurity learners from academia, industry, government, military that is aligned with global industry standards? And
My first thought is either that's a vendor with a unique solution or that is generative AI questions. And I'm sorry, I hope I didn't upset someone out there, but
very specific question.
it's a very specific question.
But I guess, in my opinion, from a training perspective, I think AI, that is where AI can really come in these days and do a good job of being able to create, based on training the AI, right? You can come up with a lot of different unique scenarios, but have the same themes behind them, right? And you can get a lot of good training these days out of AI.
I made light of that with a joke, but there's actually Clint. What's his solution?
The red versus blue.
Yeah,
I know what you're talking about.
Anyway, he's a prime example, and honestly, what he's brought is gamification to tabletop exercises and red team versus blue team, where it's technical but not like deep technical. And I at first I thought that was like, okay, yeah, cool idea, Clint, right? But then I was at one of my large clients, and I participated with their executive team in the red team, blue team, using Clint's platform. Not only was it a really interesting experience, it was almost like a team bonding experience. It was fantastic. So I think what Clint has done is actually threat gen.
Yes, threat gen. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. So I think that's just one example of where, Gen AI could be interesting in that type of scenario. Having said that, here's one thing that I am a little bit concerned with in terms of Gen AI. I think if you're approaching it in the right way, it can be very powerful in the right type of circumstance, where 90% of the output is just, honestly, it's phenomenal, right? And then 10% is almost made up, artificial, hallucination, whatever you want to state. And the one thing that occurs to me is it's my experience that allows me to detect that 10% that's bad. So how are we applying the validation to the output? And that would be my only concern. Listen, who's to say where it's going to be in 12 months? But that's my concern is human validation.
So back to James then, with reference to like this AI training, have you heard of companies using, AI or any other type of technology to kind of test, candidates and see what their capability is as part of the hiring process?
You know what? I don't think I have. I was listening to that question. I was thinking, crikey, have I missed a beat here? I'll be honest. I haven't seen too much of it, to be transparent. But I think my initial concern lines up with yourself, Roger, on that. There was a podcast I was listening to weeks ago. It was nothing to do with cyber. I think it was like Joe Rogan or something, and they were talking about it's really great, but then it got a bunch of like results for, I think it was like boxing records wrong and things like that. So my gut went, well, hang on, if it's getting that wrong, and like you say, we only knew because we knew, is it maybe best as a like a sort of foundational, okay, cool, here's to point you in the right direction, here's the basics of a particular topic or area, and then build upon that with a live instructor or person or whoever, I don't know what it's for exactly, but something like that was my gut feel. But I've never seen it used as a an interview stage, if you like.
Yeah. So Chuck, that's an interesting question. Do you know of a solution? Is that why you asked the question?
No, I just
if it doesn't exist, it should. That's a great idea.
Yeah, dude, be some kind of it's almost like you were talking about, though, the behavioral based, interviewing process,
Yeah,
right? You can
yeah.
actually see how people respond, possibly. But I just didn't know if that was out there. It was kind of interesting idea.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I'm gonna have to do some quick Googling after this.
Talk to Clint.
Yeah, yeah. So, I think Clint's about the only example I can think of from a training and OT perspective that kind of fits that question that was asked by the audience. Um, but I'm sure there's going to be more. And I do think there is some real interesting opportunities of the future. Um, I think we're just getting started. Just look where Gen AI has come in 12 months. It's so who's to say where we will be another 12 months? So, I think it's really interesting. So, do we have any other audience questions out there?
I think this is, something we've talked around a little bit, but let's talk about it a little bit more directly, right? We're in the cybersecurity is all about risk, right?
Mhm.
So, what can we do, James, maybe from your perspective, to really reduce the risk in that hiring process, right? Because that's a huge step when you bring somebody on a team. It changes the team dynamics. You're really expecting them to contribute fairly quickly. How do we really try to reduce that risk?
So risk is in we don't want to upset the balance of the team, or risk
Well,
of
just hiring the right person, right? I mean, making sure that it's that as perfect a fit as you can get.
yeah, I think you're bringing it back to what you guys have spoken about before. It's that let's set what we actually need, and then the culture piece is huge. You're right. That I think that goes probably as important as tech skills, if not maybe more. And using those behavioral questions, and it's I think veer away from anything to do with AI and have this conversation face to face if you can, or on a video platform. You can read body language, and you can ask those. So when was the last time you learned something new? When was the biggest mistake you've made? The weakness, and anyone who starts sort of not really giving any examples to that or saying they haven't got any weaknesses, that's probably sort of maybe an alarm bell to maybe dig a little bit deeper there. But I think recognizing the kind of culture you've got, and if your culture, and there's nothing wrong with this either way, I'm not pointing yes or no's to it, but if it's a very 9 to 5 culture and you've got somebody that you wants to break down barriers and get promoted and do this and that, and that's fine, but we need to be very honest with what we've got so that we don't bring somebody in and then they say, oh, hang on, I was hoping for this and we've got this. Similarly, if it's like a culture of we're not quite the 9 to 5, we tend to go above and beyond a lot in this particular team here, trying to be honest with the people and saying that's what this is, please don't come here if that's not what you're up for, and being very honest about that. And again, you can ask those behavioral questions off the back of it to see if they are that sort of person. And if they're not, that's cool. But that's why we have these interview processes ultimately, I think, so we don't have that situation of, hang on, you've got another job. How? Oh yeah, it's fine, Roger. I'll do it in my spare time. No, you won't. No, that's not how this works. But yeah, I think just being honest on both sides.
What's that?
Yeah. That would be my advice, I think. Yeah, be honest to what you've got as early as you can be, whether that's through yourself, HR, the recruiting partner, just so everybody's on the same page. And it goes the same as well for money or compensation or travel and all these sorts of things. Otherwise, it's a car crash.
That makes a ton of sense.
The one thing I would think of from maybe the manufacturing sector and maybe some of the other sectors, when you're looking at some of the needs you might have in developing some of your programs, it's really just slicing and dicing the stage you are within your program, right? And maybe if you're at an implementation and deployment stage, do so rapidly. Bring in some contract expertise. You might pay a higher price initially for that 12 months contract, but when you look at the longer term cost, if you will, of bringing on an employee where you only have a short term need and you don't have a future fit and you're paying all the benefits and everything else, it makes more sense to bring in that contract window. So there's consulting firms and recruiters that you can actually reach, but leverage that to don't let that be a limiting factor to building out the program that you need to really address the risk appetite that you have for your organization.
Makes a ton of sense. So James, are you seeing, and maybe we touched on this earlier, I can't remember, but companies coming to you saying, hey, we'd like to try to buy, try before we buy kind of thing, and hire somebody on a 6-month contract or a 12-month contract with the option to hire full-time later? Is that gaining traction or not?
Funny you say that, actually. So companies haven't come to me and said that's the option we'd like to go with, but funny enough, candidates in the market who are doing the more freelance work that have then rolled into maybe more permanent have said exactly that. And they've said, transparently, I'm not a fit for everybody. Here's what I can offer. Most of the people I've worked with try me on a 3 to 6 month thing and then maybe roll it over or maybe take me on for a couple of years. But it's, very, I had 3 of those conversations last week, actually, weirdly. And I haven't before that. So that's not a loaded question, I'm assuming. You haven't been listening to my calls, but
not that you know.
But from a more common with the freelance candidates, I'd say offering that up as an option over companies saying let's try before we buy.
Interesting.
So I do see, Chuck, that there is a new question. So how do we train cyber leaders to understand the difference between OT and IT and be able to manage programs that serve both needs? Since at the executive level, it is all risk management problems.
That's a great question.
It is.
I love it. It kind of really comes to the essence of where we are in cyber right now, I think. I'll give my short answer and then toss it back to you, Roger. But, I think the question is stated very well, right? It is all about risk management. It should be all about risk management, right? And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of what we call the shiny object syndrome, right? Where, hey, this company is putting in an IDS or doing some kind of fancy, automated patch management or whatever. And then other companies get on board and say, yeah, that looks like fun. Well, let's do that, right? And they're not looking at it from that top down. What is the best bang for the buck in terms of risk reduction to the company, right? And I think that is key. And part of that is being able to help them quantize what is the risk in terms of dollars and cents, right, to the company. And that's a different way of thinking about it from what has been done in the industry in the past. But I think that's one of the things that we at Hillstrong believe strongly is key to getting that executive level sponsorship for these types of programs, right? So, Roger, what do you say about that?
I think you probably know what I'm going to say, Chuck. It goes back to the mission, right? And
Yeah.
I think it's interesting when you talk about risk. So whether you're an IT executive looking at addressing, risk on the OT side, or whether you're the OT executive on the other side, it's risk is perceived differently because risk has a different meaning based upon your domain, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm on the operations side, if I'm a plant manager, risk to me is human safety. It's environmental safety. It's downtime, right? It's not meeting production goals. Those are my risks that I'm thinking about. Where, of course, on the IT side, it's very different. So I think it's understanding and spending time with the other. Again, going back to that cross-functional, that pollination type of an approach of understanding that mission, and that the mission as a manufacturer, as an example, is to produce a product to your quality standards, distribute that product to a point of sale and sell that product, and then support it. That's your mission as a business. Everything else is in support of that mission. So It's go back to the organizational objectives and mission of the organization, and that's how you achieve alignment.
I think that really sums up what we've been trying to say here too, from a recruiting perspective, from a team building perspective. If you put that mission of the company first, I think you're going to have much better results than looking for that fabled unicorn, that ticks all the tech boxes, right? And the certification boxes. James, any last words?
Nothing from me. I just hope that was valuable, and hope there was snippets in there that people have taken away. It's flown by. I can't believe it's been the hour mark already. So thank you for having me, gents. It was good fun.
Yeah. Thank you so much, guys. Great conversation. And thank you everyone for participating. And for those of you that couldn't, hopefully you're catching this recorded. Thank you so much.
And don't forget, you can always check the Hillstrong website if you want to set a meeting with Roger or myself, or figure out what we do. But again, thanks for attending, and look forward to the next one.
Thanks, everyone.